My name is Dustin Bowersox. I am the market manager for Textile and Apparel with Datacolor. Excited to be able to share with you kind of some market trends from the textile industry, but more importantly for us and hopefully for you, the SpectraVision technology itself. So with that being said, I'm going to share a little bit upfront about the retail landscape and specifically how color management has evolved and will continue to need to evolve as we go forward. So the retail landscape today, style influencers are everywhere. It's social media, all the apps, Instagram, Facebook, even looking at what took place this past weekend with the royal wedding. Events like that have reached a mass audience, and with that, the evolution and the expectations of the consumer has changed as well. They see it, they want it, and in most cases, they can quickly find those trends out in the market in a rather short period of time. So what that has done is it's placed a lot of pressure on the brands and the supply chain to be able to react to this want it now mentality from the consumer. So that getting from the point of design to execution is critical, that all the inefficiencies are driven out of the process. Color accountability is also being shifted to the source and manufacturer. This has been taking place for the last several years as brands and suppliers look to eliminate the back and forth shipping of samples and communication. And I know we have a lot of brands on the phone right now and even on the production side as well, but I'm guessing the next point rings true, that color team resources have decreased over the past several years. So actual headcount to be able to support the development and execution of all the product for the textile and apparel industry. So what that's done is it's placed additional pressure to make sure that those limited color team resources are actually working on the most value-added activities, so that again, you don't waste resources on merely lab dip communication and strike off communication. And then the last bullet point, I don't think this will ever change, but the sourcing strategies continue to evolve. So in some instances, again, chasing cheaper labor, that's been the common practice to find mills and find vendors around the world who are a little bit cheaper cost, still can deliver the quality. But also on the flip side, there's new sourcing strategies of kind of being close to your consumer. So a little more kind of, from product execution to delivery within the region of which the consumer is actually going to be. We're seeing growing trends in that as well. So I want to take a second and just kind of talk about the history of solid color. And this isn't probably news for anybody on the phone, but I think it's important to recognize how valuable the tools and the best-in-class processes, how that's really driven significant cost savings and innovation. So when you look 10, 20 years ago at the history of solid color, it was once an inefficient, costly, and subjective process. It was done very similar to how a lot of the unmeasurable processes, which we're going to talk about shortly, was completed. Samples were dyed by the mill, they were sent overseas, they were visually assessed either by the design team, maybe the color team, and throughout this back and forth process, that subjectivity eventually resulted in a lab dip approval in which the mill was able to execute and compare it going forward with production. With the implementation of spectrophotometers and QC software, standardized light sources, the use of engineered color standards, and ultimately even supply chain accreditations, the industry has really taken advantage of, again, I see millions and millions and millions of dollars year over year when these objective means of color management are implemented. Again, design, getting comfortable with the fact that when they specify a color, they pick a color that the color team and the mill can determine whether or not their expectations have been hit and met. So for everything that worked well from a solid color perspective and everything that we can pat ourselves on the back for, we still have an entire subset of materials that are deemed unmeasurable, which accounts for roughly over 50% of textiles today. So again, what we're forced to do as an industry is manage these in a subjective kind of manual review manner. These samples are assigned by the brands, delivered, communicated to the mills. The mills are doing physical samples, physical dyeing, physical printing, and deliver those samples for manual review. Oftentimes, these unmeasurables are actually managed either by the color team, but more often than not, even by the design team, which adds another layer of subjectivity into the mix as well. So at the end of all that, what it all adds up to is, we suffer a huge amount of time and cost to ensure color consistency. And as the next slide will show, results kind of vary as to how successful that process is. I'm going to spend a second talking about the visual evaluation process, and this is pretty black and white. It's not a lot of science or kind of data here, but I think it's important to call it out because it adds a significant amount of cost for both the brands and the suppliers. So when you look at the visual evaluation process, what is actually happening? The receipt of samples, the retrieving of standards going into the files and pulling previous rounds, the visual comparison of individual colors, and I'll highlight that one just because, in my opinion, that's really the only point on this screen that requires an expert level of kind of color experience. The documenting of color comments, the filing of color standards away when completed with the review. And again, I bring this point up alphabetically because professionals are paid a lot of money to practice their ABCs after a review is done. A significant amount of time is spent filing standards away, which it sounds silly, but in the end game actually drives a lot of cost when you look at how those resources are spent. The physical samples being put away, and then also just the communication of those comments and overall approval status. All these steps are highly administrative, very time intensive, and unfortunately at the end of it all, it delivers very inconsistent results. I'll also point here that a lot of times we call out designers for, if they're involved in this process, for adding subjectivity to the mix with their unique way of color commenting. That might be true, and maybe color experts do a better job of communicating color, but I would challenge that color experts still fall into the same traps, the same pitfalls of evaluating a color on a Monday versus a Friday, being in a good mood versus a not so good mood. The inconsistency still lies within even those experts as well. So now we're going to talk a little bit about hyperspectral imaging, and I'll allow everyone to kind of read what the definition is, how we've tagged it, but what it actually is hyperspectral cameras are collecting information as a set of images. So each image that is taken represents a very small wavelength of the visual light spectrum. Once this is done, these images are combined into a three-dimensional cube, which can later be utilized by data color tools, software, and kind of broken apart and analyzed at that point. If you look at how hyperspectral applications or what applications are out there today, this technology has been around for quite a while. In astronomy, mapping the stars, you see that on the left-hand side. In agriculture, understanding kind of crop health and the disease ratio of kind of crop that's at risk. Geosciences, so kind of water vapor and topographical kind of information. Bottom left is surveillance. That's been around for a while. The new way in which it's being used for the fashion industry, which we're trying to bring to market. And then on the bottom right, the biomedical fields, being able to take this further as well. So I'm going to speak at a high level about how the technology, what are some of the key components of it and what it actually is doing. And then Lisa's going to go into much more detail about use case applications and be able to kind of talk about where we've seen success thus far. So if you can see the data color SpectraVision unit on the top left, looks very similar to a benchtop instrument, and it has some of the same key features as well. It has the sphere and xenon flash lamp as the light source. The new one of the additions here is the wheels with 31 color filters. That represents the 31 measurements that are taking through each of those lenses as the measurement takes place, and then a very high precision digital camera in the back with a lens that focuses that image. So what this is demonstrating here is an actual kind of replication, or at least an animation of what is happening inside the unit. This sample in the middle, the blue sample, has 4 different blues as part of the kind of the design or the artwork. Once the measurement is taken, every 10 nanometers, the filter wheel moves and a measurement is taken. As that's done, you can see that those 4 individual colors are actually broken apart, and at that point, 4 unique spectral curves have been developed and have been captured. At that point, it's solid color management, just like we've managed it for the last 20, 30 years, however long that's been around. You have 4 unique thumbprints that can be used to communicate digital color expectations. Mills can understand what tolerances need to be delivered in that regard. And at that point, communication becomes very objective as to a pass-fail type tolerance. So I'm just referencing that point I just spoke to. So what does that mean? It's great that we have a device that does that, but basically what this image is showing is that there's actually 600,000 plus measurements that are being taken every time you measure a sample. So you can imagine the amount of data that this generates. Every pixel within an image is basically getting a spectral curve or a measurement. So a large amount of data that's being able to be developed and kind of stored with this device. So what does this mean then? No subjectivity means higher quality. Just as we spoke through from the solid color kind of history lesson that we gave. Once you're able to break apart those unmeasurable components and actually stamp them with a spectral curve, you're able to set expectations, you're able to have tolerances well understood so that brand and supply chain all are working from the same playing field. And you remove the human error that often is introduced when performing visual assessments. So let's talk about a very common way in which a garment is produced today. Unfortunately, I don't know of many sourcing models where one garment is completely manufactured within one facility. So in most large sourcing matrices, it's very common for body fabric to be executed by one vendor and supplier, and the cuff or the drawstring or other kind of other trims to be manufactured at other facilities. In a lot of ways, what happens when the body fabric is executed and the trim has to come and be cut and sewn together, there's always a risk that although you started from the same point, because so much visual assessment and subjectivity is brought into the mix, when it comes together in product form, there's an opportunity where we have mismatch. So with SpectraVision, one thing that I think is very advantageous is if a designer falls in love with a print, that print can actually be measured and broken apart into those individual spectral curves for each color in the print, and those can be communicated to your component providers so that they're starting from the same page. Oftentimes what happens today is that a brand has to work with the color team or is forced to visually assess the colors within that print, match them to the nearest engineered color standard in their library, and then specify that. At that point, you've already started to tweak the initial inspiration of what the designer fell in love with. So it's in a unique way of getting the actual trend that the designer wanted to execute to and communicating that immediately to the supply chain to set them up for success. So we're just running through the scenarios here of how that works. Another piece here that we want to talk about, which with some of our larger brands who support both the home categories and other items where you know, they're merchandised together, where products are merchandised together, is the coordinating sets. So in this example, we're showing the home area, lampshades, rugs, pillows, curtains. Again, if these are definitely manufactured by different vendors, different suppliers. So if a print or pattern is the trend for the season, those same practices of measuring with SpectraVision, communicating those individual spectral curves to the participating mills who are going to create that assortment, then being able to QC that once they all come back in to compare the pillow to the lampshade, to the curtain, etc. So you're going to be much more, you're going to be able to, in advance, be able to recognize any potential color quality concerns, because unfortunately, a vendor is typically able to identify the issues when it's a cut and sew for a garment because they're the ones assembling. A lot of times, coordinating sets where it's coming from different vendors completely, the first time that it's recognized as a color issue is oftentimes either on the floor or on the sales floor, or even when the consumer purchases. The last piece I want to talk about here is the digital communication of colorimetric and image data. We talk about fast decision making. Right now, merchants and designers and the cross-functional teams have to anticipate what the consumer is going to respond to. So they may have a certain design with 3 or 4 colorways, and through consumer real data, it might be selling really, really well. They might want to blow out that assortment, have additional colorways. With that kind of that need to respond quickly to consumer data, SpectraVision allows you to do that. I want to add a different colorway and tie in these 3 colors, communicate immediately those new additional colors, and get that information straight to the mill so that they can respond in real time to the data, which hopefully drives those additional sales. So that's not, I mean, I don't want to say it's voodoo, but in some ways it kind of is when you're trying to use historical data to understand what the consumer response to a design and colorway is going to be. So at this point, I'm going to transition to my colleague, Lisa Beck, and she's going to walk you through kind of use case for the data color SpectraVision. I thank you for your time. And again, I wasn't on the call initially, but if there are any questions, please begin to fill out the questions tab, and I'll be paying attention, and we'll get back to them when Lisa's done speaking.
So with tools, with SpectraVision, you're going to have SpectraVision, you're going to have tools SV 2.5, and for those of you that are familiar with tools, the workflows are very familiar, would be familiar to you, with a few additions for the collection work, which you'll see in some of the slides. An Ethernet cable, power cable, calibration kit included, the sample holder, which is shown in the lower left-hand side of the screen, and I'll explain the use for that in the next slide, and then a 1-year hardware warranty, and then the user guide. So this is the example of the sample holder. The image shows what we are calling the sample holder and its functionality. The tool allows the user the ability to capture multiple colors in one measurement by folding and holding the fabric in place. This tool is helpful in situations where the colors are spaced out or within the print, and when you have more colors than will fit within the aperture at one point in time. So there's strong magnets on both sides of the fabric, holding the fabric in place, and then the fabric is folded between the 2 magnets, and then the user can accommodate 6 or more colors in one measurement doing this. Some people might prefer to go ahead and measure multiple times, but this tool will allow you to capture multiple colors in one measurement. So now we have a demo video of the software. The video is going to illustrate the use of the system in a typical workflow for the approval of a print and a trim component in a garment. The video will cover the following topics: how to create a collection for a print, measure a print sample using the color separation routines, analyzing the data reporting, the new QTX2 file to exchange data across the supply chain, and automated routines to approve strike-off and/or bulk samples and to review the trims. So I'm going to switch it over to Chin, and then she's going to run the video, and then we're going to come back to me.
Video illustrates the use of SpectraVision and tools SV in a typical workflow for the approval of a print and a trim component in a garment. Turn the instrument on by pressing the power button in the lower right-hand side of the unit. This instrument has a similar sample arm attachment as our 800 spectrophotometers. This can be pulled back to view the aperture plate and correctly position the sample. The aperture plate is a square 25.5 millimeter illuminated and 23 millimeter viewed. The aperture plate can be removed, but do not touch the inside of the plate. Place the plate back on the unit. Now take your sample and determine which is the face side of the fabric. Place the area you would like to measure on the sample arm. The fabric should be flat, and with prints, use a single layer. The placement can be viewed prior to starting measurements by pulling back the entire aperture plate for review. The fabric is well placed and ready for measurements. Bring the plate back up to close and proceed with the measurements. Once the fabric is in place, select Batch Instrument to begin measuring your collection. Collections are groups of standards in print colorways or seasonal palettes. The standards in a collection will typically be current standards from the customer's library, obtained as a QTX and measured with Datacolor 600 and 800 instruments. SpectraVision measurements are backward compatible with Datacolor high-end benchtop spectrophotometers. To create a collection, go to the Manage Collections icon on the toolbar and select New. Type in the name of your master collection. The system supports multiple levels of collections. In the example, we have created one master collection, Diamonds Print, and two sub-collections, Diamonds Print Top and Bottom for girls' PJs. Once the sub-collections have been created, the user can add standards. Press the Add Standard button and use the browser to add the standards for each of the sub-collections. After the standards have been added, click on the Diamonds Print Master Collection and press the Retrieve button. The Diamonds Print Master Collection and Sub-Collection are now on the desktop. We will now proceed to measure the print sample. Click on the Diamonds Print Top Sub-Collection. Place the sample on the instrument and press the Batch Instrument button to initiate the measurement. The system first shows the sample view dialog. This view allows users to correctly position the sample on the instrument's aperture. When ready, press OK. The instrument will capture the image of the sample by taking a total of 31 pictures across the visible spectrum and will generate a reflectance curve per color. The progress of the measurement is shown on the screen. When finished, a rendering of the captured image will be shown on the color separation dialog. Since we initially provided the standards in the collection, the system automatically identifies and separates all of the colors available in the print that match the colors of the standards. The names of the colors are automatically assigned based on the name of the standard and a suffix that can be defined in the Batch Defaults section of the program. The user can choose to include the collection name as a prefix in the name as well. When needed, the user will adjust the border slider to achieve an optimal separation. When ready, press Done. The system automatically prompts the user for the round number. This parameter is used to track the submit number and to trigger the creation of the approved collection, which we will discuss later in this video. The data from the measured submits goes to the tool's desktop. Each separated color is associated to the correct standard. The user can evaluate colorimetric data numerically and graphically. When the monitor is calibrated, the user can perform on-screen evaluations using the color patch. Let's now measure the same print and use manual separation this time. The user will again press the batch instrument button and follow the previous steps. In the color separation dialog, the user will switch the mode from automatic to manual to start the color selection. Multiple tools are available and its use will vary depending on the size of the area of color, material type, blended or transition colors, etc. In this example, we will drag and select each color in the order listed in the name boxes. Notice the number in % shown in the box right next to the name. This represents the amount in percentage of each color in the captured view and will vary depending on the border selection. Additional color selection tools like zoom in and pan for smaller areas of color, pixel size, or remove small details are also available. For more information, refer to the documentation included in the Tools SV DVD. When satisfied with the color separation results, the user will press Done to send the data to the tool's desktop. The system will again prompt for the round number. The user can choose to disable the round number or add additional rounds in the Batch Defaults section. Create Approved Collection allows users to evaluate additional submissions against the approved samples, strike-off, or bulk. The user will first choose the approved round number from the approved round drop-down list in the collection section. Then she or he will press the Create Approved button on the tools bar. A new approved collection is now available on the desktop. Notice that all previous submitted data is deactivated or hidden to help users focus on the task at hand. The user can now proceed to measure the bulk samples or trims if applicable. In the video, we have measured a zipper that is a component of the same garment as the diamond's print. Trims can be measured against samples at any stage of the process, standards, approved strike-off, or approved bulk. Create Review procedure allows users to review specific batches in one or multiple collections together for evaluation. Use the Review Batch drop-down list and choose Yes for the samples that you wish to review. In the example, we will do this for the orange and yellow only. Press the Create Review button from the toolbar. A new sample review collection has been added to the master collection with only the yellow and orange. The user can proceed measuring trims or retrieve other submissions from different collections for additional evaluations. The template available in Tools SV offers user-defined fields for collections, standard, and batches. These can be used to record colorist comments, submission dates, approval decisions, and others. After the comments have been added to the user-defined fields, the user is ready to share the submit's data. A new format called QTX2 is available to exchange collection information, colorimetric, and image data across the supply chain. Press Export Desktop and type in the name of the submit. For additional data analysis of all the collection and colorimetric data can also be exported to Excel. Right-click on the standard pane and choose Export All with the User-Defined Fields option.
Okay, so now that everyone's seen the video, we're going to go through some of the actual materials that have been evaluated so far. Give you a little bit more idea. So how we've kind of broken these out, we have them divided up by positive results, known limitations, and then some ongoing research. These groups are not necessarily set in stone, but will evolve as the new techniques are developed or new materials are added and tested. The positive results are currently defined as the simple prints, fiber blends, trims, mesh, upholstery, and lace. Simple prints, by our definition, are prints with colors that have a defined contrast, which separate easily. There are no current exceptions with those. Fiber blends, fabrications like suiting that can be separated successfully. Some customers have asked for the overall appearance, which it can be done by selecting the entire area, the color measurement window, and the reduced border size. Trims generally used in textiles like zippers, bows, cording, etc. measure well. You would just need to make sure that there's flat on the aperture and there's no light escaping during the measurement. Mesh samples are measured successfully, and there can be challenges similar to lace when you have very glossy samples. And then upholstery, successful separations are achieved currently with upholstery. Recommendations, for example, for the image on the screen would be to capture a large area. So you see this is the upholstery sample. So you would want to capture the large area of the ground, and then 3x3 for the actual embroidered section. And then lace, actually, and the reason we say this is not set in stone, originally lace, when we first started working with the particular material, it was one of the ongoing research. And so now there have been new methods defined to kind of measure the lace samples. So that's why it's now moved up to this positive results. Okay, next. And just going through a couple of a little bit more in depth on some specific ones. Simple prints for each section. We're going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail, but in collections like what is shown that are matched back to official standards, the color separation automatically finds the color in the print that matches the standard listed in the collection. Simple prints work really well with automated separation unless the color difference between the standards is too much. In these cases, you would proceed to manual separation. In the images, you can see the separated portion. So if you look at the bottom, you can see the triangle on the left-hand side with the pink, and then a portion of the yellow box or rectangle. Okay. Trims, zippers, bows, and other materials used for garment components can be consistently measured, separated as long as they can be placed flat against the aperture, like we said earlier. Some bulky materials like buttons, plastic rings, and other types of components need to be carefully handled to guarantee consistent measurements. Manual separation would be used when there's a large color variation between the metal or the plastic versus textile, and samples should always be placed in the same orientation to provide consistent measurements. Laces are partially successful depending on the number of colors, gloss, texture of the components. So those factors, so if you have something that's a little bit more of a high sheen, that might make it a little bit more of a challenge when you're doing the measurements, but it has still been successful. Recent evaluations in the measurement methods have changed the status of this particular material. So what you would do in this particular instance, you would actually measure the ground netting with a 3x3. You would zoom in and you would actually capture that ground netting, and then you would do a manual separation and you will get a more consistent measurement. Okay. And then materials that we know we have some known limitations. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's set, again, like I said, doesn't mean that it's set in stone. It's just that's currently where we are based on what we've tested so far. So we continue to update the list as far as what we're working on, the materials we were evaluating. Complex prints where there's two or more colors which are very close together, blended colors or high pile prints work considerably well using the mask function in combination with the border size. What we would consider, just as an example of a complex print, would be a watercolor where the print has a set number of standards, but the colors are blended within the print at varied levels. So with a watercolor, you might have five standards to start out, but because of the variation in the blending of the material, the color, you might actually have 12 colors in the actual print just based on the blending. That would be something where you have manual selection is typically required in most cases. Marls are successfully separated using the small pixel size and zoom in capabilities. There have been some exceptions when the construction is very tight with 2 or more colors close to each other. Heathers, some heathers where the colors are high contrast and not too blended can be separated well. And then the instances where the fibers are blended and similar colors are exceptions. Yarn dye and piece dye, open weave constructions separate well. Yarn and piece dye fabrics can be separated successfully. Some limitations are still present depending on how tight the weft and the warp are. The yarns can be measured consistently. Recommend that the yarn is wound around a card and use specially designed devices with springs that clamp on. So, and then high pile materials such as carpets, towels, and furs have been done with close correlation to the 800 for solid high pile fabric. So the recommendation for this particular material, so if you have, for example, a towel and it's a solid color, you would in most cases be better off just measuring with an 800 versus necessarily going with a SpectraVision. If you had a printed towel, now that's something that you would definitely want to use SpectraVision for that material, but if it's just a solid color, then I would just go with an 800. Heathers, color deconstruction in heather materials is sometimes difficult as the colors are blended into each thread. Some heathers where the colors are different enough and not too blended can be separated well. Others are still challenging. Some customers do want the overall appearance, and if your starting standard is another heather, then you have to start with a manual separation and measure the same spot as the batch. If the results are below 0.5 DE CMC, then you have a consistent method for separation. Okay. Yarns and yarn dye, recommend to wind the yarn around a card or tab and use specifically designed devices. Yarn tension is a concern. Comparable results can be attained with an 800 instrument if the yarn sample is large enough to be placed on the aperture, but you can see just in the visual that you can see the yarn, the blue yarn very well, and then you can actually see the separation between the blue and the white. So if I had the white sample appear on the same image, you would see both, but just reversed. And then materials we have is listed as ongoing research, and this is just based on what we've looked at so far. So if you don't see something on this list, doesn't mean that it just may not have been evaluated or requested to be evaluated at this point. More evaluations done on the LACE submits so LACE originally, as of 3 weeks ago, had been on the bottom, had been on this ongoing research, but because of the new methods of measurement, it actually bumped up. So that's why we're saying that just because it's currently listed on one of these different tabs doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stay on ongoing research or known limitations. Metallic materials for this particular example, like trims or glitter, can be measured relative to another sample, strike-off versus bulk, relative measurement difference, but they don't really work for highly specular reflections. So there are limitations. High pile fabrics, again, this goes back to one color high pile fabrics, velvet, fur, towels, etc. should be measured with an 800 instrument with the recommendations for these types of materials. The donut sample holder, for example. The reason is mainly the measurement process for the 800 doesn't require the measurement to be done through 31 filters. So it is faster to go through an 800 than it would be necessarily to do the SpectraVision measurement. The use of an 800 also allows for measuring the materials multiple times with rotation and repositioning and averaging the results. Tools SV 2.5 currently does not have the ability to average. This is going to be added later in a new update. Some of the techniques include to put the material behind a glass plate to prevent the material from bulging into the spectrophotometer. It is critical that the instrument be configured to read in specular excluded mode to remove the glossy reflectance due to the glass. And then if you need the image is required, but the measurements, this should be comparable to the 800. Okay. And then we have just some kind of overall general recommendations based on some of the materials we've tested and evaluated so far. Starting with the separation methods are not specific to a type of fabric or material, and they may considerably vary depending on the materials and complexity of a structure. So not all simple prints can be done separated automatically. So that may mean that just due to the print itself, the design of the print, that might make it a little bit more complex, for example. Once a successful separation has been achieved, it should be used across all submits to ensure consistency. Use the same instrument conditions that was used for the standards, UV calibration for white, UV excluded for colors, particularly in fabrics with high optical brightener content. This requires a minimum of 2 measurements per sample, 1 for the colors and 1 for white. To ensure a successful auto or manual separation, adjust the border until the white highlighted areas turn black. For those materials that require overall appearance, make sure the reported percent coverage is close to 100%. And then as long as they can fit in the aperture, single color materials should be measured with an 800 instrument. If the materials are too small, completely cover the instrument aperture. And recommending that the user stores the separation methods used, the border size, box size, automatic versus manual, shows separation, percent coverage, and remove small details. And always try to measure in the same area for the pattern for better consistency. And then the new format of QTX2 contains the image and the colorimetric data, which can be exchanged using some of the following recommended platforms: Google Drive, Dropbox, Box.com. These files are larger than the normal QTX file because of the image data, so it is generally not possible to email these files. The workflow image illustrates how the QTX2 files can be shared between the brand, supplier, and mill. So you can communicate the files back and forth. Just as an example, my colleague and I share files all the time via Dropbox. So she'll put them in and I'll download them, or I'll put some in and she'll download them, so that it works really well. Box.com does as well. We are providing the opportunity for customers to have an evaluation prior to a demonstration or trial. The customer can submit samples for this initial evaluation. You can do this if you wanted to find out, like if you're not quite ready to have a demo or to do a long trial, you could just send in samples and then we'll do a report and send those back. So you will receive a consolidated report depending on the materials, with an overview, repeatability, on-screen evaluation, the measurement results, and some of the tests performed. If you're interested in sending samples for assessment, or if you're interested in setting up a trial, and then please contact one of the members of the specifier team who are listed in this slide. So Tom Stutz covers North America, Stephanie Pick covers Europe, and Basto Wong covers Asia. So you can contact any of these 3 people and they can definitely get you set up for a sample assessment, and they would get this taken care of and set up for you. And then lastly, we are actually having a Data Color Textile Summit coming up in June, and you actually, hopefully if you guys would be able to join us, we actually will have SpectraVision there, so you would actually be able to see it firsthand, try it out. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this up on the screen, and if you wanted to register, the website is below, and the dates are right there, so June 19th through the 21st.
All right, thanks, Lisa. I think we can leave that up there, and we can jump into questions, the questions and answers point then. So again, I encourage anyone who has any questions to please communicate those, and we'll take a look. We have a few questions. The first one is, do we need to remeasure my standards that were measured with a 600 or 800 instrument?
No, you do not. It's backward compatible, so you do not have to remeasure your standards.
Got it. Okay. Another question that came through, understanding how can I measure multiple colors that will not all fit in the aperture?
You can either use this, most likely you would use the sample holder, you would fold it and be able to kind of get it so that you could measure multiple colors at once. So the sample holder will hold it in place and hold the colors in the aperture.
Got it. Great. Let's see what else we got here. Here's one about light sources. So the current availability of light sources within SpectraVision, what are they?
You only can do two, the primary and secondary. The light sources themselves are the same as tools. It's just that you don't necessarily have the ability to see all three in the color patch.
Got it. Okay. See if there's anything else. Any last minute questions for the data color team?
I would say if you guys have any questions, feel free to contact myself or Dustin or Tommy Lekchansky. I've never pronounced his name right, but he is actually the product manager for the hardware, and any of us would be glad to help you.
Great. Outstanding. Well, I want to thank everyone for their time today. Apologize for the snafu at the beginning of the webinar. Again, please take advantage of the data color experts that are your main point of contact, whether that be from the specifying team or, as Lisa mentioned, her or myself, and we'll make sure we get you in contact and get your questions answered as fast as possible. Everyone, have a great day, and again, thanks for your time.
Thank you.